Do you feel these invisible chains, don't you? They tighten around your chest every time that person's name crosses your mind, every time you pass the place where you used to go together, every time a song plays and transports you back to moments that no longer exist. I know exactly how that feels, like there are transparent threads connecting you eternally to someone who hurt you, like you're a puppet on a string, controlled by someone who isn't even there anymore. But what you're about to discover will change all of that forever, because there's a truth about human suffering that Eckhart Tolle revealed after years immersed in the deepest mental darkness. A truth so simple, it seems impossible, so revolutionary, it will make you question every tear you've shed for someone. And at the end of this journey, you will understand why you will never again need to feel held hostage by the pain others inflict on you. Tolle was sitting on a park bench at 29 years old, depressed, lost, thinking about ending it all. And it was in that moment of utter despair that something extraordinary happened. Something he would describe as the most important awakening of modern humanity. He looked at his own suffering as if for the first time, and he noticed something shocking. The suffering didn't come from outside. It didn't come from the people who had abandoned him. It didn't come from life's circumstances. The suffering was an internal creation, a story his mind relentlessly told about himself. Have you ever stopped to observe your own pain? Not to run from it, not to try to cure it, not to try to explain it. Just observe, as if you were a scientist studying a fascinating phenomenon. Because when you do that, when you really observe, something amazing happens. You realize there's a huge difference between the pain and the one who feels the pain. You are not the pain. You are the one observing the pain. This discovery is like cleaning a mirror clouded for years for the first time. Suddenly, you see your real reflection, not the distorted version you thought you were. But wait, before you think this is just another self-help conversation, let me tell you something that will chill you to the bone. Tolle realized that every time we suffer for someone, we are not suffering for the person themselves. We are suffering for the idealized version we have created of them in our minds. We are in love with a ghost. We are trapped in an illusion. Think of the person who caused you the most pain recently. Now answer honestly, are you suffering for the real person or for the idea you've built about them? Because that real person, flesh and blood, with flaws, fears and limitations, was probably never who you thought they were. You fell in love with a projection. You clung to a dream. And how do you free yourself from a dream? You wake up, but waking up hurts. Because it means accepting that the perfect version you created in your head never really existed. It means accepting that you were loving a mirage in the desert of your longing. You know what's most liberating about all this? When you understand that you weren't rejected by a real person, you were rejected by an illusion you yourself created. The pain you feel now is the mourning for the end of a fantasy. It's the process of saying goodbye to someone who never existed. Tolle discovered something even deeper. He realized that attachment is not love. Attachment is fear. Fear of being alone. Fear of not being enough. Fear of facing the emptiness inside you. When you cling to someone, you're not loving that person. You're using that person as a drug to avoid feeling your own incompleteness. And like any drug, the effect wears off, and you need more. More attention, more validation, more presence, until the person gets tired of being your source of wholeness and leaves. Then you're left with emotional withdrawal, desperate for your dose, convinced that without that person you can't live. But that's a lie. The truth is that you have always been complete. You just didn't know it. Have you ever noticed that when you're truly in love, you feel a deep peace? Not that desperate anxiety we call passion, but serenity. A feeling that everything is in its right place. That peace doesn't come from the other person. That peace comes from you being connected to your own essence. The person only serves as a mirror for you to remember who you really are. But when you confuse the mirror with the source, you get lost. You give your power to someone who never had the capacity to carry that weight. And then the inevitable happens. The person breaks the mirror. Because no one can be responsible for another human being's happiness for very long. Tolle calls this the end of the illusion of the other as savior. It's one of the most painful moments of human life, but it's also the most liberating. Because it's only when you stop looking for your completeness in others that you discover the infinite completeness that has always existed within you. Imagine a person who grows up in a dark basement. They've never seen the sun. For them, the only source of light are the candles that other people carry. They spend their whole life depending on those candles, begging not to be left in the dark, until one day, someone takes them out of the basement, and they discover that there is an infinite source of light called the sun, and they realize that they always had access to this light. They just didn't know it. You are that person, and every time you suffer for someone, you're going back to the basement, forgetting that the sun exists. The sun is your own awareness, your ability to be present, your ability to connect with the present moment without needing anything or anyone to feel complete. But how do you access that light when the chains of attachment seem so real, when the pain is so intense that you can't even breathe properly? Tolle developed a technique that has changed the lives of millions of people, a technique so simple that you can start applying it right now. Every time the pain appears, instead of resisting it or identifying with it, you will observe it as if it were a phenomenon of nature, as if you were a meteorologist observing a storm. You will take a deep breath and say, the pain is here, interesting. How does it manifest in my body? Where exactly do I feel this sensation? How does it move? And something magical happens. The pain is still there, but you are no longer the pain. You are the space where the pain happens. It's as if you were the sky and the pain were a passing cloud. The sky is never affected by the clouds. It simply allows them to pass. When you understand this in practice, when you truly incorporate this truth into your body, something irreversible happens. You realize that no person in the world has power over your internal state, because your internal state does not depend on external circumstances. It all depends on your relationship with the present moment, and that relationship is always under your control. But be careful, there's a subtle trap in this process, a trap most people fall into, and end up suffering even more. The trap is trying to use this technique to get rid of the pain, to make the pain disappear quickly, to feel good again, right away. This doesn't work because you're still operating from attachment. Now, you're attached to the state of no pain. True freedom comes when you accept that pain can be present, and you're still okay. When you realize your fundamental well-being is independent of whether you're feeling pain or pleasure. Tolle spent 3 years observing his own mind in this way. 3 years watching thoughts and emotions rise and fall like waves on the ocean. And gradually, he realized he wasn't the waves. He was the ocean. You are the ocean too. And all the pain you feel for any person is just a temporary wave on the surface of your infinite consciousness. But there are waves that seem like tsunamis, pains so intense you're sure they'll destroy you. And it's about these pains that we need to talk about now, because there's a specific type of suffering that Tolle considers the hardest to transcend. The suffering that arises when you realize you've invested years of your life in an illusion. When you wake up and see that what you thought was love was actually emotional dependence. This is the pain of mourning your own naivete, the pain of accepting that you were wrong, and wrong in a big way. Do you remember the last time you felt completely foolish for believing someone, for trusting promises that were obviously lies, for ignoring all the red flags because you really wanted it to work out? This pain has a specific taste. It's a mixture of anger and shame. Anger at the person who deceived you, and shame at yourself for letting it happen. And here's Tolle's most profound insight about this kind of suffering. He said this pain is actually a gift, a painful gift, but a gift nonetheless, because it's only through this pain that you learn to distinguish love from need. It's only by going through this humiliation that you develop emotional discernment. Before this pain, you confused intensity with depth. You confused chemistry with compatibility. You confused promises with actions. After this pain, you develop a more refined perception. You can feel the difference between someone who truly loves you and someone who just needs you for something. You can tell when a person is being authentic or when they're playing a role to get what they want. It's as if you've developed an emotional radar, an ability to read between the lines of human behavior. And this radar doesn't develop through theories or self-help books. It develops through the pain of being deceived, through the direct experience of having your trust betrayed. So paradoxically, every person who made you suffer was a teacher. Every betrayal was a lesson. Every abandonment was a degree from the University of Life. But only if you can extract the lesson without becoming cynical. only if you can learn to protect yourself without closing your heart. And how do you do that? How do you become wise without becoming bitter? Tolle discovered that there's a fundamental difference between building walls and developing discernment. Walls are rigid. Discernment is fluid. When you build walls, you close yourself off to all possibilities. When you develop discernment, you open yourself only to healthy possibilities. It's like the difference between being a bunker and being a house with doors and windows that you can open and close as needed. And there's a very simple test to know if you're developing discernment or building walls. Observe your reaction when you meet a new person who could be romantically interesting. If you feel fear, immediate suspicion, a desire to run away, you're in bunker mode. If you feel cautious curiosity, attention to detail, a desire to get to know them slowly, you're in discernment mode. In bunker mode, you miss real opportunities for connection, for fear of getting hurt again. In discernment mode, you protect yourself without depriving yourself. But here's the secret that most people don't understand. Discernment doesn't develop through distrust. It develops through self-trust. When you trust yourself deeply, when you know you can handle any situation that arises, you don't need to be afraid to open yourself up. You know that if the person betrays you, you'll be sad, but you'll survive. You know that if the person abandons you, you'll feel pain, but you'll recover. This self-confidence isn't arrogance. It's emotional wisdom. It's knowing that you are greater than any circumstance that may happen in your life. And how do you develop this self-confidence? Through a practice that Tolle considers essential, the practice of being alone without feeling lonely. Most people confuse solitude with loneliness. Solitude is being physically alone. Loneliness is feeling disconnected even in the middle of a crowd. When you learn to be alone without feeling lonely, when you discover that your own company is enough, you stop seeking in others what only you can give yourself. And then something interesting happens. People start to feel attracted to you in a different way. Not because you need them, but because you choose to be with them. There's a very specific energy in someone who is complete alone, a magnetic energy. Say presence. It's the energy of someone who isn't trying to fill a void, of someone who isn't desperate for validation, of someone who genuinely likes themselves. And when you radiate this energy, you attract people who are also in that same state. People who want to share abundance, not fill a void. But we've reached a crucial point in our conversation, a point where most people get stuck. Because it's one thing to understand all this intellectually. It's another thing to apply it when pain is tearing you apart. When you're in the middle of an emotional crisis, when you've just discovered a betrayal, or when the person you love has told you they don't love you anymore. How do you access this wisdom? How do you remember you're the ocean when you're feeling like a wave about to break on the rocks? Tolle faced this very question during the 3 darkest years of his life, and he discovered something that will completely change how you deal with emotional crises. He realized that there's a specific moment in all intense suffering, a moment that most people miss because they're too absorbed in the pain. It's that moment between the trigger and the emotional reaction, that microscopic space where you still have a choice. Imagine you've just seen the person you love in someone else's arms, or received a text saying it's over. There's a split second between you processing that information and your world collapsing. In that fraction of a second, you have a choice. You can completely identify with the pain that's coming, or you can position yourself as an observer of it. Most people throw themselves headlong into the pain. It's instinctive, it's human. But Tolle discovered there's a third option. You can say to yourself, something very painful is about to happen inside me. I'm going to allow it to happen, but I'm going to observe it like I observe an approaching storm. And here's the revolutionary insight. When you observe the pain arriving instead of merging with it, something extraordinary happens. The pain still hurts, but it doesn't overwhelm you. It's like the difference between being caught off guard by a giant wave and seeing the wave coming and preparing for it. But Tolle went further. He discovered there's a specific technique for these moments of acute crisis, a technique he calls body anchoring. When emotional pain is tearing you apart, instead of trying to escape it or analyze it mentally, you're going to do the opposite. You're going to dive completely into the physical sensation of the pain. Where exactly do you feel this pain in your body? In your chest, your throat, your stomach? Breathe deeply and go to that place. Feel the temperature of the pain, the texture, the weight, the shape. It seems contradictory, But when you connect physically with the pain, instead of getting lost in the mental stories about the pain, something fascinating happens. The pain transforms. It ceases to be an invisible monster that haunts you and becomes a specific sensation that has a beginning, middle, and end. Tolle realized that most of our suffering doesn't come from the pain itself. It comes from resistance to the pain. It comes from the stories we tell ourselves about what that pain means. I'll never be able to love again. This proves I'm worthless. Everyone always abandons me. These stories amplify the real pain to gigantic proportions. They transform a temporary wound into a permanent identity. But when you return to the pure sensation, when you stop interpreting and start just feeling, you realize that the pain is far more bearable than the stories about the pain. And there's something even deeper to this technique, something that Tolle took years to fully understand. When you completely accept the pain, when you stop fighting against it, you access an inexhaustible source of inner strength, a strength that has always been there, but that you only discover in moments of greatest fragility. It's as if the total acceptance of your vulnerability connects you with a mysterious invincibility. Tolle calls this the paradox of surrender. The more you surrender to what you're feeling, the stronger you become. The more you accept your human fragility, the more you connect with something indestructible within you. But beware, there's a crucial difference between surrender and resignation, between acceptance and passivity. Resignation is saying, I'm going to suffer forever and I can't do anything about it. Surrender is saying, I'm suffering now and I'm going to allow this pain to teach me what I need to learn. Resignation paralyzes you. Surrender liberates you. And here's a discovery that can change your life forever. Tolle realized that every intense pain we feel for someone is trying to show us a part of ourselves that we haven't yet accepted. The person who abandoned you is mirroring your fear of abandonment. The person who betrayed you is mirroring your distrust in yourself. The person who rejected you is mirroring your self-rejection. This doesn't mean the pain isn't real. It means the pain has a function. It's trying to show you where you still need to heal. When you understand this, when you realize that each person who hurts you is actually a mirror of your unhealed wounds, your relationship with suffering changes completely. You stop being a victim and become a student. You stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what is this trying to teach me? And the answer always has to do with self-love. Always. If you suffer when you're abandoned, the lesson is to learn not to abandon yourself. If you suffer when you're betrayed, the lesson is to learn to be true to yourself. If you suffer when you're rejected, the lesson is to learn to accept yourself unconditionally. Tolle discovered that there's a direct correlation between how much you love yourself and how much you suffer for others. The less self-love you have, the more you seek that love in other people, and the more vulnerable you become when they leave. But when you develop a solid relationship with yourself, when you genuinely enjoy your own company, when you become your own source of validation, something magical happens. You remain capable of loving deeply, but you no longer need the love of others to feel complete. You begin to love out of abundance, not out of need. And here's the secret that the self-help industry doesn't want you to know. Self-love doesn't develop through positive affirmations or self-esteem techniques. Self-love develops through the radical acceptance of who you are, including the parts of you that you consider unacceptable, including your need for love, including your tendency toward attachment, including your human vulnerability. When you stop trying to be perfect and accept being human, when you embrace your imperfections instead of fighting against them, you access a kind of peace that is independent of external circumstances. And from that peace is born true self-love, not the performative self-love you show on Instagram, the silent self-love that no one sees, but that sustains your entire existence. But let's talk about something no one wants to hear, about the hardest part of this process of liberation. There's a specific moment on the healing journey where you need to grieve, not just the person who hurt you, but the version of yourself who believed in that person. You need to say goodbye to the naive part of you that thought love was enough to keep someone, to the romantic part that believed in promises of eternity, to the hopeful part that ignored obvious signs of incompatibility. This grief is necessary because you can only be emotionally reborn after accepting that a part of you died, the part that believed in fairy tales, the part that thought it could change someone with love, the part that confused intensity with depth. This symbolic death is one of the most painful processes of the human experience, because it means accepting that you were wrong about something fundamental, that your perception of reality was distorted. It's a painful realization, but it's also the most liberating process, because only by letting these illusions die can you be reborn into a wiser version of yourself, a version that loves without losing itself, that gives itself without being annihilated, that trusts without being naive. And here's something that will surprise you. Eckhart Tolle discovered that the people who have gone through the most intense pain of abandonment and betrayal often become the wisest about love, because they learned firsthand the difference between love and dependence, intimacy and fusion, caring and controlling. They developed a kind of mature love that most people never experience, a love that liberates instead of imprisons, that strengthens instead of weakens. But there's a trap in this process of emotional maturation, a trap that can make you exchange emotional dependence for emotional coldness. The trap is thinking that to avoid suffering, you need to feel nothing, that to avoid attachment, you need to disconnect, that to avoid being vulnerable, you need to be inauthentic. That's not evolution, that's emotional anesthesia. True evolution is keeping your heart open even after being hurt. It's continuing to be vulnerable, even knowing that vulnerability always involves risk. It's like learning to drive after an accident. You don't stop driving, you become more attentive, more cautious, more skilled, but you keep driving. With love, it's the same thing. You don't stop loving after being hurt. You love with more discernment, more awareness, more wisdom, but you keep loving. And there's a fundamental difference between immature love and mature love that Eckhart Tolle considers essential for anyone who wants to stop suffering from relationships. Immature love says, "I love you because I need you." Mature love says, "I need you because I love you." The difference seems subtle, but it's revolutionary. In the first case, you love to fill a void. In the second, you choose to need someone you already love. In the first case, if the person leaves, you lose your source of wholeness. In the second case, if the person leaves, you lose someone special, but you remain whole. In the first case, you're afraid of losing the person. In the second case, you're grateful for having had them. And how do you develop this capacity to love maturely? How do you go from emotional scarcity to abundance? Through a practice that Eckhart Tolle considers the most important of all. The practice of being present. Because when you are truly present, when your attention is completely on the present moment, you realize that at this exact moment you are okay. You may be feeling pain, but you're okay. You may be missing someone, but you're okay. You may be afraid of the future, but at this moment, now, you are breathing. You are alive. You are okay. And when you access this feeling of well-being that is independent of circumstances, when you discover that you can be okay even in the midst of emotional chaos, you stop seeking in others the peace that only you can give yourself. You discover that the thirst for love you felt was actually a thirst for presence. And presence is something you can always access, regardless of who is or isn't in your life. But let me ask you a question that could change everything for you. What if all the suffering you felt to date was necessary? What if every person who hurt you was inadvertently helping you discover your true strength? What if every abandonment taught you not to abandon yourself? What if every betrayal taught you to be true to yourself? What if every rejection taught you the value of self-acceptance? What if you look back now and realize that, despite all the pain, you've become someone wiser, stronger, more compassionate? What if you can feel gratitude for the people who hurt you because they inadvertently freed you from illusions that kept you prisoner? This isn't a rhetorical question. It's an invitation to a complete change of perspective. Because when you can see your wounds as portals of growth, when you transform your scars into wisdom, when you use your pain as fuel for your evolution, something extraordinary happens. You become immune to unnecessary suffering. Not because you don't feel anymore, but because you understand the purpose of each feeling. You still feel pain when you lose someone you love, but it's the clean pain of grief, not the contaminated pain of mental drama. You still feel sadness when something ends, but it's the honest sadness of impermanence and not the desperate sadness of attachment. You still feel fear when you open yourself up to someone new, but it's the healthy fear of vulnerability, not the paralyzing fear of imagined catastrophe. And in this state of expanded awareness, in this condition of emotional freedom, you attract a different kind of people into your life. People who are also in this process of growth. People who want to share abundance and not fill a void. People who value your independence instead of trying to control you. And when you meet these people, when you experience relationships based on choice instead of need, you understand why you had to go through so much pain before, because you can only recognize true love after having experienced its imitations. You can only value authentic intimacy after having lived through superficiality. You can only choose consciously after having been chosen unconsciously so many times. And here we come to the end of our journey, back to those invisible chains you felt in the beginning. Now you know that those chains were never real. They were made of thoughts, memories, projections, fears. They were made of smoke. And now you know that the clouded mirror of your perception is finally clean. And in it, you see your true reflection, not the distorted version that needed others to feel whole. You see someone complete, someone free, someone who can love deeply without losing themselves, who can give themselves without being annihilated, who can be vulnerable without being fragile. You discovered that you never needed to suffer for someone, because what you called love was dependence, what you called passion was need, what you called connection was projection. And now you know the difference. Now you can truly love, because true love is being free even when you're together. It's being whole even when sharing. It's being yourself, especially when you're with someone else. And when you love like that, when you love in this mature and conscious way, you realize something that will leave you at peace forever. True love never goes away. It may change form, it may transform, it may evolve, but it never disappears. Because true love doesn't depend on the physical presence of the other. It depends on your capacity to love. And that capacity, that sacred ability to connect deeply with life, no one can ever take that away from you. It's yours, forever. No one will be able to make you suffer needlessly again. Because now you know who you are, and you know that that is enough. You've awakened to your own inherent worth. You are no longer a puppet on a string, manipulated by the invisible chains of past hurts. Eckhart Tolle speaks of this awakening, this shedding of the illusion of needing someone else to complete you, this liberation from the transparent threads that bound you to a mirage in the desert of your longing. It's a journey, a sometimes painful but ultimately transformative process of letting go, of recognizing the illusion of the other as savior. You are your own source of wholeness. Remember the tears you've shed, the mental darkness you've navigated, the emotional withdrawal. Those experiences, those invisible chains, they don't define you. They shaped you. They made you stronger. They were a part of your journey. And now you are free. Free from that dark basement of the past. You've walked out into the sun, feeling its warmth on your face, and you understand that the pain, the heartache, it was just a storm, and you weathered it. You are like a meteorologist, observing a storm from the sky and clouds, understanding its power, and yet remaining separate. You've found your center, your inner strength. Eckhart Tolle's teachings illuminated the path. You are a real person, flesh and blood and worthy of love and capable of immense joy. Now, you are free, truly free. And that, my friend, is everything.